The tag was black. It was marked with a single, greasy E, expectant. It meant he was already gone. It meant you didn't waste supplies. You didn't waste time. You moved on to the next one. The one you could save. But I looked at his face. 19. Maybe 20 years old, covered in mud and blood, his chest barely rising. And I made a choice. I wouldn't let him die. Not this one. Not tonight. My name is Sarah McKay, and that night, in the chaotic, screaming hell of the 95th Evacuation Hospital, was the night I finally broke. It all started in a small town in central Ohio. We weren't a big city. We were the kind of town where everyone flew a flag on the 4th of July, and the biggest event of the year was the high school football game. My father ran the local hardware store. He never talked about his time in Korea, but you could see it in his eyes when the national anthem played. You grew up with this ingrained sense of duty. I wasn't inspired by movies. I was inspired by Mrs. Gable, a woman from my church who had been a nurse in the Korean War. She was quiet, dignified, and she had a strength I'd never seen. When I was little, she told me, "Nursing, Sarah, is about holding a hand. Sometimes you're healing, and sometimes you're just there. Both are just as important." I knew from the time I was 12, I was going to be a nurse. I never wavered. I graduated from nursing school in the fall of 1967. The world was changing. There were protests on TV, arguments at the dinner table. But for me, it all became real in January of '68, during the Tet Offensive. A boy I'd known my whole life, Tommy Peterson, who used to pull my hair in 3rd grade and who I'd shared my first nervous Coca-Cola with. He was killed in action near Hoosh. I remember getting the news and feeling not just sad but angry. I wasn't a protester. I didn't understand the politics, but I understood Tommy wasn't coming home. I felt useless. I had to do something. The next week, I walked into the Army recruiter's office in Columbus. I was still in my white nursing uniform from my shift at the local hospital. The recruiters, 2 men who looked bored out of their minds, just stared. I said, "I'm a registered nurse. I want to volunteer for Vietnam." You'd have thought I'd told them they won the lottery. The red carpet rolled out so fast, I nearly tripped on it. Then I had to go home and tell my parents. My mother cried. She begged me not to go. My father, though, he just stood by the fireplace for a long time, his back to me. Then he turned around. His eyes were wet. He just nodded once and said, "You make us proud, Sarah. Just come home." I left for basic training at Fort Sam Houston in July 1968. They tried to prepare us. They really did. But how do you prepare for war? The most horrific part of training wasn't learning to fire a weapon or dealing with tropical diseases. It was the mass casualty simulation. They took us to a muddy field, filled it with smoke, and had actors. Some of them real amputees from stateside hospitals, screaming, covered in fake blood, begging for help. Our job wasn't to treat. Our job was to triage, to walk through the chaos with a set of colored tags, red for urgent, yellow for delayed, and black for expectant. How do you walk past a man screaming for his mother, clutching a gut wound, and tag him black? How do you decide who lives and who dies in 30 seconds? I threw up after the first simulation. The instructor, a hardened captain, just looked at me and said, "Get used to it, Lieutenant. Out there, hesitation kills the ones you can save." This was just the beginning of my journey. And if you're moved by these stories of service and the sacrifices made by ordinary people in extraordinary times, please take a moment to subscribe to Living the Stories. Your support allows us to keep sharing them. From training, I was sent to Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. The first patient I was assigned to, in the burn unit, was a young Marine, Corporal Davis. He'd been in an armored personnel carrier that hit a mine. He wasn't just burned, he was fused. He didn't look human. He was just a shape under the bandages. And the smell of burned flesh. I'll never forget it. But he was awake, and he was conscious. My job was to debride his wounds, to pull away the dead tissue. It was agony for him. And all he would do is whisper, Am I going to make it, Lieutenant? Just tell me the truth. But the thing that struck me most about Walter Reed was the resilience. The amputee ward. These guys were insane. They were just kids, 19, 20 years old, missing legs, arms, and they'd have these high-stakes poker games in the rec room. The ante wasn't money, it was their evening dose of morphine. They were broken, but they weren't beaten. I fell in love with all of them. Their spirit, it's what I thought I was going over there to protect. I left for Vietnam on January 10th, 1969. We landed at Da Nang Air Base. The moment the C-130 ramp lowered, it was like walking into a wall. The heat, the humidity, and the smell. It was a mix of jet fuel, rotting vegetation, human waste, and something metallic. The smell of fear. I was assigned to the 95th Evacuation Hospital. They put me in a small trailer, a hooch, with another nurse, Mary. That first night, I was just unpacking my small bag when the world exploded. The whole trailer shook. Sirens wailed. Red lights flashed everywhere. Mary, who's been there 3 months, didn't even flinch. She just grabbed my arm, dragged me out of bed, and shoved me underneath it. "Welcome to Da Nang, new girl," she grunted. "That's just Puff the Magic Dragon laying down cover fire for the perimeter. Don't worry unless you hear a whistle." We lay there all night, under that flimsy metal bed, as the sky ripped apart with explosions. And that's when I realized it. Deep in my bones, I was never going to feel completely safe again. The next morning, we had the orientation lecture, "Welcome to Vietnam, ladies." A colonel stood at a podium, talking about winning the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. I looked around. We were in a concrete bunker. The ground was shaking from B-50, 2 SEM flying high overhead, on their way to arc-light missions. Winning hearts and minds? I thought, we're here to save them, aren't we? The dissonance, the gap between the words and the reality, was staggering. They were short-handed, so despite my being new, my experience at Walter Reed got me put straight into the post-op ICU. It was a 30-bed unit. It was never empty. My first patient wasn't a hero. He wasn't a hardened soldier. I'll call him Kid. He couldn't have been more than 18. He'd stepped on a bouncing Betty's mine. He was a triple amputee. Both legs and his right arm were gone. Just gone. He was pale, shivering from shock, and drifting in and out of consciousness. I was terrified. Not of the blood, not of the wounds. I was terrified of what I was supposed to say. I held his remaining hand. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion and terror, and he whispered, "Is my mom here? I want my mom." I held his hand. I stroked his hair. I said, "It's okay, soldier. You're safe. We're going to take care of you." I lied. He wasn't safe, and I wasn't sure we could take care of him. He died 3 hours later. I was the last person who held his hand. But the physical wounds, as horrific as they weren't even the hardest part. It was the reason for it all. The futility, that's what started to break you. About 2 months in, we had a mass casualty event. A mass cal choppers just kept coming, one after another. Dust-offs, they called them. We were running, just trying to plug holes. They were from the 101st Airborne. They'd been hit hard taking a hill north of us, a godforsaken piece of rock they'd code-named Objective Viper. We worked for 36 hours straight. We saved a lot of them. We lost a lot. Then I swear it was maybe 2-3 weeks later, another mass cal. The same screaming, the same wounds, the choppers landing, the rotors beating the air. I was triaging a young soldier, putting pressure on a femoral artery bleed, and I looked at his shoulder patch. 101st. I looked at his tags. Objective Viper. I shouted over the noise to the corpsman. "What's going on? I thought we took Viper?" The soldier I was working on, he was conscious. He grabbed my wrist. I looked down at him. He was pale, but his eyes were furious. He spat out, "We did, Lieutenant. We took it. Cost us 12 men. Then command pulled us out." "You left?" I asked, confused. They pulled us out, he repeated, his voice raspy, and the NVA walked right back in. Now we're taking it again. He closed his eyes. I just stood there, my gloves covered in his blood, taking the same patch of dirt. For nothing. The futility of it, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. And the war wasn't just fought on the hills. It was fought in the villages, in the markets, among the people we were supposed to be winning. One afternoon, they brought in civilians, a skirmish in a nearby village. An ARVN, one of our South Vietnamese allies, had gotten spooked and thrown a grenade into a market stall. They brought in a mother and her daughter, maybe 6 years old. The little girl had shrapnel all through her legs and abdomen. The mother was gone, but they brought her in anyway. I was working on the little girl, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to find a vein, and I could hear her crying in Vietnamese, "Mama, Mama," and her mother was lying on a gurney, 2 beds over, covered by a poncho. The grenade, it wasn't VC, it was an accident, an ally. That little girl lost her mother because someone got scared. How do you explain that? How do you put that anywhere in your heart? You build walls to survive that. You have to. You learn to shut off the emotion, to be a machine. You focus on the procedure, on the blood type, on the pressure dressing. You build the walls high and thick. But sometimes someone gets through, and that hurts in a different way. His name was Mike. He was a Marine Recon sniper. He didn't come into the hospital as a patient. He'd fly in with the dust-offs, sometimes riding shotgun just to get back to base. He was normal, or as normal as you could be in that place. He was charming, funny, and he had blue eyes that hadn't turned cold yet. He'd bring us Liberated Sea rations, the good ones with the peaches. He'd sit with Mary and me in the hooch during a lull, and he'd tell us stories about his dog back home in California. He made me forget where I was, just for an hour at a time. We fell into something. It wasn't a relationship. Not really. It was an understanding, a need for human connection in a place that was trying to grind all the humanity out of you. One night he came in, not on a chopper, but in a Jeep. His team had been on a long-range patrol, and they'd gotten into a firefight. He was stable, but he'd taken shrapnel to his shoulder and side. It wasn't critical, but it was deep. I was the one who helped get him prepped for surgery. "Hey, Sarah," he smiled, wincing as we moved him. "Looks like I finally get to see if you're any good at this nursing thing." "Just be quiet and let me work," I said, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I had to cut his fatigues off him. They were soaked in blood and sweat. As I was cutting his pant leg to check for other wounds, something fell out of his breast pocket. A letter, half written, stained with his sweat. I picked it up, intending to put it with his personal effects, but my eyes caught the first line. "My dearest Anne." My blood went cold. I read the next line. "Tell little Timmy that his daddy loves him, and I'll be home soon." I think the room spun. Anne, Timmy. He had a family, a wife and a son. In all the months, all the talks, all the shared fears, he had never mentioned them. He'd let me believe. I just stood there, holding the letter. He saw my face. His smile faded. He knew. He couldn't look at me. He just stared at the ceiling. "Sarah," he started. "Who's Anne?" My voice was quiet. It didn't even sound like me. She's my wife," he whispered. I put the letter down. I finished cutting his uniform. I prepped his arm for the IV. I didn't say another word. I was a machine again. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I pulled my arm away. "The doctor will be in soon, Marine." He was evacuated to Japan the next day. I never saw him again. He wasn't sorry for the lie. He was just sorry he got caught. After that, the walls went up, high and thick. I threw myself into the work. I took extra shifts. I volunteered for triage during every mass cal. I became hard. I became the nurse who didn't flinch, the one who could tag a boy black without shedding a tear. I thought I was unbreakable. Until the night I did break. It was monsoon season. Rain was hammering the tin roof of the hospital so hard it sounded like gunfire. And then real gunfire erupted. A major offensive. The base was under attack. And the choppers came, one after another, landing in the mud, soldiers dragging out the wounded. It was chaos. We were overwhelmed in minutes. The floors were slick with blood and rainwater. Mass cal, all hands. I was in triage. Corpsmen were yelling, "This one's gone, Lieutenant. This one's a priority." They brought him in on a stretcher and dropped him on the floor because all the beds were full. The corpsman who brought him in just pointed. "He's tagged, Lieutenant Expectant." The tag was black. I looked down. He was a kid, maybe 19, a massive, sucking chest wound. Every time he tried to breathe, a pink foam bubbled from the hole in his chest. His eyes were open, rolling back. "He's tagged," the corpsman yelled again, already moving to the next man. I just stared at the boy. And I saw Tommy, I saw the kid who wanted his mom. I saw the futility of Objective Viper. I saw the lie in Mike's eyes, and something snapped. "He is not gone." I screamed over the noise. I grabbed a chest tube tray. "Get me O-neg and a Vaseline gauze. Now." A corpsman, a young kid named Miller, tried to stop me. "Lieutenant Triage. He's black tagged. We have 2 more reds coming in." "I don't care." I shoved him. "I'm not letting this one die." I dropped to my knees in the blood and the mud. I put the gauze over the wound, trying to seal it. I was yelling for blood, for a cut-down tray. I was trying to get an IV started. His veins had collapsed. I was working frantically, cursing, screaming. I was pouring blood into him, but it was coming right back out. His pressure was non-existent. I didn't even notice Mary, my fellow nurse, kneeling beside me. She put her hand on mine. Her hand was steady. Mine was shaking so hard I couldn't hold the needle. "Sarah," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Sarah, stop." "No, I can save him. I just need more time." "Sarah, look at me." She grabbed my face and forced me to look at her. "He's gone. He's been gone. You can't save them all. He's gone." And I just stopped. I looked down. The boy's eyes were fixed. The foam had stopped bubbling. I was just pumping blood into a dead man. I looked at my hands. They were covered in his blood. Mary didn't say anything. She just pulled me to my feet. She walked me out of the triage bay, past the rows of wounded and dying. We went outside, into the rain. I couldn't breathe. I just collapsed against the bunker wall and sobbed. I wept for the boy. I wept for Tommy. I wept for the mother and her little girl. I wept for the lie. I wept for that whole stupid, pointless hill. I wept because I was 23 years old, and I was broken. I finished my tour 2 months later. The flight home was silent. When we landed in San Francisco, there were no parades. There were no thank yous. Just people in the airport who stared at us, or worse, looked away. You leave the war, but it doesn't leave you. Not really. You learn to carry it. You carry the ones who made it, and you carry the ones you couldn't save. You carry the black tag in your pocket for the rest of your life.